Good evening, everyone. I would like to welcome all of you to the 11th Annual Women in Science Career Panel event. My name is Teresa Larkin, and I'm an Associate Professor of Physics Education and Director of the Dual Degree Combined Plan Engineering Program option AU offers in affiliation with Columbia University. Along with my colleague, Jessica Usinski, I also serve as co-advisor to our Women in Science student organization. It's an honor for me to serve as a moderator of this important event. Let me first remind you that this session will be recorded and made available to those who are not able to attend today's event. We have assembled an outstanding panel of alumni who received at least one STEM major or minor at AU. We have invited them to this platform today to provide helpful suggestions and offer advice to you, our current students in the sciences at AU. We hope that the dialogue we begin today will serve to provide you with some advice and useful information as you go forward on your own career paths. The alumni that have taken time out of their own schedules to join us today include Annika Bergstrom, Irene Glowinski, Mackenzie O'Donnell, Miriam Melkumyan, Tara Dimitri, and Tasia Reddy. We will begin shortly, and once we do, I will begin by asking each of our alumni to introduce themselves. And then before we do that, I'd like to begin with just a few thank yous. First, I would like to thank Chelsea Anderson, the events coordinator for CAS, for her assistance with this event. We certainly could not have pulled this off without Chelsea. I would also like to thank CAS Dean Max Paul Friedman and Associate Dean Nuria Villanova for their support of WIS and our annual career panel event. The amazing individuals in our AU Career Center also merit a thank you for helping us put this event together. These include Nathan Slusher, Anna Lippman, Marie Spalding, Linda Goldman, and Samantha Mitchell. I thank you for your continued and tireless efforts to assist our students, including our undergraduate and graduate students, as well as recent graduates as they navigate from the academic world to the next phase of their professional journeys. One goal of this panel event is to learn about the experiences of our alums as they traversed both their academic as well as their professional STEM careers. It is our hope that these shared experiences will provide encouragement to our current undergraduate and graduate students in STEM. An additional goal of tonight's event is about making important connections. One thing I've learned, having spent about 25 years of my career at AU, is that our alumni understand the importance of making and keeping professional connections. They stay in touch with faculty members and are always willing to give their time to help out current students. Making these kinds of connections is perhaps more important now than it has ever been before. We are presently in uncharted territory as we do our best to traverse a path that is overshadowed by a global pandemic. That said, this is also a moment in time when we can stand back and recognize the important role that science plays in the solution to this global crisis. It is through science that solutions will be found. And we also saw STEM in action this past week as the Perseverance rover, or Percy as its nickname, became the first artificial object to land on Mars since the InSight Mars lander in 2018. In fact, it was the first rover to land since Curiosity touched down in 2012. Percy is the largest, most advanced rover NASA has ever sent to another world. It traveled almost 300 million miles in just over 200 days to get there. And we're now getting raw images, and even some audio clips have started coming back in, all because of STEM. These are but two examples that exemplify the fact that there's no better time to be a member of the scientific community than right now. These are truly unprecedented times. I want to share with you the message that I continue to reiterate to my own students. It's simple and it's powerful. And that is simply, we are stronger together. It is through events such as this one, that I'm reminded of the true sense of community that forms the backbone of everything we do to embrace one another and live the message of equity and inclusion as members of the AU community. Before we begin, I want to outline the format for this event. Following these welcome remarks, the alumni will each speak for 1 to 2 minutes to introduce themselves. Then my co-moderator and WIS president, Kelly Mima, will ask the panelists some questions from a list prepared by the Career Center and sent to the panelists in advance. We will set aside about 30 minutes for these questions, and then we will move on to questions from the audience. So please type your questions into the Q&A area, and we will do our best to address as many of them as we can in the time that remains near the end of the session. So lastly, I want to say thank you to all of the panelists, and perhaps we can just go ahead and have each of you, starting with Annika, introduce yourselves 1 to 2 minutes before I'll turn this over to Kelly to ask the questions.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Larkin, for that great introduction, and thank you everyone for being here tonight and listening to our experiences in science. So I'll start. I graduated from AU in 2015. My degree was in public health. After I graduated, I was deciding between doing a master's in public health or working in a career. And I was lucky enough to have a fellowship opportunity through the CDC and DC Department of Health. And I worked for the health department in DC for a couple years as a disease investigator. And that work really spurred my interest into the field of medicine and being a clinical provider. And I worked 1 more year. I was hired at the DC Department of Health doing investigative work in tuberculosis and STIs, including HIV. And I decided to apply to medical school. And that's where I've been for the last 3 years. I'm currently a medical student at GW. I graduate next year in 2022, and I'm currently planning to specialize in internal medicine and infectious diseases, although I haven't decided yet, but that has been my journey to science.
Irene?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for inviting me. I got my undergraduate degree, BS in chemistry from American University in 1975, which is a really long time ago. I went right to graduate school to the University of Michigan, where I got a PhD in pharmacology, which is the study of drugs on the human body. I spent 5 years there and really wanted to come back to Washington, DC, which I had fallen in love with as an undergraduate. So I went to NIH and I did a postdoc, 5-year postdoc in the National Cancer Institute on the campus in the laboratories in Bethesda. And living in Washington, you know, you're bombarded with things political all around you. And that got me thinking about how come what Congress was doing was impacting what I was doing in the lab. And so I decided to apply for a congressional fellowship, and I got one. So I went to work on Capitol Hill for essentially 2 years, and I worked for the House Science and Technology Committee doing everything that a House Science and Technology Committee does. I learned all about the budget operations. I put on hearings. These were in the years of genetically modified organisms coming out into the world for the first time. The artificial heart was one of the hearings I put on. It was a fabulous experience. But then I decided it was time to leave Congress because there really wasn't a good career path for a scientist. And I wanted to advance. I could have stayed in Congress and doing the same thing for the rest of my career, and I really wanted to do more. So I went back to the National Institutes of Health in a grant giving, the extramural community, which is the grant and contract world. And many of you know that the NIH budget for biomedical research is about $43 billion, most of which goes out into the community in the form of grants and contracts. So that was in 1989. I spent the rest of my career at NIH. I spent 10 years at one institute called the National Institute of General Medical Sciences, which is focused on basic biomedical research. And then I spent the last essentially 19 years of my career working for the National Institute for Allergy and Infectious Diseases in the Division of Microbiology and Infectious Diseases. And I retired in 2019, but I am now working back for NIH as a contractor on 2 part-time projects. I think you're muted.
Thank you, Irene. Mackenzie?
Making sure I'm not muted before I get started here. I just want to start with saying thank you for everybody to be involved in this conversation, and it's an honor to be invited to speak on this panel. Thank you so much. Happy to have represented AU as my undergrad choice for the last 10 years in my career. I joined American in 2005 because basically American was in the city that I really wanted to be there. I had family in the area. For those of you who are just starting out in our science field for this school, you picked a great city, which is where you really start out, is you pick a great city where you love feeling something out and really following your dreams there. Irene really put a nail on the head on that one, where if you follow the politics of the city, you really can learn a lot about yourself in a very important time of your lives in undergrad and in graduate programs. So I got started in the College of Arts and Sciences in environmental studies, but I wasn't there at first. I started out with political science and started navigating my way by working in Congress. Then I followed psychology as an like a psychology minor, and into environmental studies as a major with environmental psychology as an undergrad. And I really didn't find my true calling in that until I actually took a semester off from American in a national outdoor leadership school semester, and took a semester away from American and was in the Colorado Rockies and got some University of Utah accredited time, spending some time out in the snow and learning a lot more about how biology works outside in the field. And I highly recommend that to any of you who are interested in taking some time off from school. There's a lot of great credits that you can take and accept by taking a minute away from school. And it really changed a lot about how I took the rest of my college career forward. After college, I worked with the Alliance for Climate Protection downtown DC, which is it's now a different, it took a different path after my time with them, but I was the national youth director. I ended up directing about 3,000 students across the Eastern Seaboard during the time right after the BP oil spill of 2010, when there needed to be a lot of leadership among youth leaders in colleges across the country, which actually is what brought a lot of the youth vote to the Obama election in 2008. So after that time in Washington, DC, I actually started looking towards, do I go on an international circuit for what my career path is, or do I head back home to San Francisco Bay Area, which is actually what I ultimately did. I ended up completing my master's degree and an MBA. So a master's degree in science for environmental management, as well as an MBA from the University of San Francisco in 2015, before I ultimately ended up moving up to running a campground and managing a large watershed and a forestry initiative in Mendocino County, where I currently work and live. And it's actually been a really great opportunity to work with a lot of communities as we navigate towards a post-COVID-19 economy. So post our panel discussion, if anybody has any questions about how that all ended up really happening, or wants to have any mentorship or career opportunity discussions on a more in-depth level, I highly recommend reaching out to me, and I'll post my contact information in the chat panel afterwards.
Thank you, Mackenzie. Miriam, would you like to go next?
Thank you, Teresa, and thank you for inviting me to this event. So I graduated from AU in 2019, so pretty recently. And I did my Bachelor of Science in Neuroscience. I had a minor in computer science, but then I dropped it because I wanted to graduate very quickly. So I graduated in 3 years, and all my friends know I'm very go, go, go. So I like to get things done and over with. So naturally, I applied to grad school right away, and I luckily got into Penn State at Penn State College of Medicine, which is in Hershey. It smells like chocolate here. It's great. Highly recommend coming to visit or going to school here. Now I'm in Penn State College of Medicine. I am in my second year of my neuroscience PhD, and I'm doing a dual title PhD in clinical and translational sciences. I think it's very important to be able to kind of translate this basic science research that we do with mice to the bigger picture, because all the science we do is ultimately for the good of the society. So it's important to be able to translate that research. So I'm working in a lab right now. I'm studying the role of neuroinflammation through microglia and astrocytic activity on anxiety and stress, and also mainly alcohol use disorder. I still don't have my big project yet for my PhD thesis, but I need to start working on that this year. So it's stressful times, but it's fun. It's very exciting. And I am very involved in the different committees at our graduate school, which gives me a lot of opportunities to learn more about different fields. And sorry if you hear my cat, she is very loud. So yeah, I will finish my PhD in about 3 to 4 more years. And then after that, I'm hoping to do a postdoctoral position in neuroscience and then ultimately have my own lab. So feel free to reach out for me if you have any questions of grad school applications or anything at all.
Thank you so much, Miriam. Tara, would you like to go next?
Sure thing. It's so wonderful to be among so many impressive women, and I'm sure there are some in the audience waiting to have impressive careers as well. So it's great to be here. My name is Tara Dimitri. I live in San Francisco. I work for a company called Generate Capital. Our main mission at Generate Capital is to invest in renewable energy infrastructure, build it and own it for a long time. And we specialize in investing in newer technology types that are hard to finance. And our mission is to make those technology types less hard to finance and to show banks and other folks that are spending money on building these things that they are bankable and that they are good investments. How I got here, I never thought my career would go this way. It was a lot about just taking chances when they came up. I love what I do. I currently run about 1,500 renewable energy assets in the United States and Canada. And I started out as a history major with a minor in applied physics. And I graduated in 2004. I thought about going to law school. I thought about going to grad school. I was dead broke when I graduated and had a lot of loans. So I had to get a job and applied to a lot of them. I got a job at a trade association called the Electric Power Supply Association and ended up working there for 8 years on energy policy and sort of helping to shape the regulations around the power grid, which was super fascinating and a great use of my degree. It isn't anything I would have picked for myself, but I really fell in love with energy infrastructure and the challenges that are facing, the world today. So I got an opportunity to become an asset manager at a big wind company up in Boston as a result of that. And I knew the markets there, but I didn't know the financial side of the business. It wasn't something that I had gotten a degree in, but somebody took a chance on me, and they really needed somebody that knew about bidding strategies and regulations in the market, and promised to teach me the other side of the business. So I took that and ran with it, and I love managing wind facilities. They're still my favorite, and there's none of them in my portfolio today. So I keep saying, let's invest in some wind. But then, follow my career from there. I ended up moving to San Francisco to work for Generate because it is just a wonderful company with a great mission, and I get to lead a great team with some really, really interesting assets.
Thank you so much, Tara. And Tasia?
Yeah, it's quite challenging to go last in this amazing group of people. Thank you again for the opportunity to speak. I'm so excited to be here. I'm Tasia Reddy. So my narrative starts off with kind of where I grew up. I'm Indian. I grew up in Botswana at the height of the HIV/AIDS epidemic. And that's sort of when I realized that you could have a ton of doctors, but you also needed some support from the basic science end of things to learn a little bit more about basic biology to help eventually translate that. So with that goal in mind, I kind of decided to apply to universities in the United States. AU was kind enough to let me in and gave me a scholarship and supported my education. And during my time at AU, I continued to do a little bit of like immunology pertinent projects with Dr. Arneson and Dr. DeSica Skinner. And that I think really kind of continued to hone in the fact that I wanted to do basic science research and keep learning more about immunology and virology. To that end, I applied to graduate schools. I completed my PhD in immunology at Harvard. Um, After a fairly challenging PhD, I want to admit, because my first advisor passed away about 3 years into my program. And then I still had to transition this very specific part of the immune system to another virus that my new advisor worked on. And again, I was lucky enough to have a bunch of amazing mentors throughout that entire process. But over the course of my PhD, I wasn't quite as smart as Miriam to understand that I needed to learn a little bit of translation well ahead of the game. And I realized that I needed to understand more about how basic science research got to drugs in clinic. To that end, I decided to take on a role in life sciences strategy consulting with this firm called Decision Resources Group. We answered a lot of key business questions for a lot of the pharmaceutical companies that we all know of, your Novartis, Vertex, Sanofi, etc. And the questions we answered were everything from how do you prioritize a portfolio of early stage preclinical assets, all the way to how do you differentiate your product from others in the market? How do you identify an appropriate clinical trial for such a drug? And then how do you go all the way up to launch planning and implementation? I learned a lot over my time at Decision Resources Group, but I still realized that there was a gap in my knowledge base between sort of that really academic research and that investigational new drug ready set of candidates that go into the clinic. So to that end, I thought technology transfer, which is the function I support and I'm in currently, would be the most appropriate place to learn about that sort of information. So I currently work as a licensing manager for the Mass General Brigham system. They were previously called Partners Healthcare. And we basically review the innovation that comes out of the Brigham and Women's Hospital and the Massachusetts General Hospital, which are some of the best hospitals in the world. And manage the cardiovascular and pulmonary inventions that come out of the system. We do everything from sort of like reviewing the patentability of these assets, filing IP on them, and once there's IP, figuring out how to out-license them to pharma companies so that they eventually continue to be developed for a potential therapeutic use. So it's a very interesting role. It's an intersection of business, science, legal, and most importantly, I think you need to be okay with not knowing everything, and it's okay to know a little bit about a few different things and be willing to ask questions throughout that entire process. So that's me in a nutshell, and happy to speak more.
Thank you so much, everybody, for the introductions. That was really great. And I'd like to turn this over to our student president now, Kelly Mima. And maybe just to keep things organized, once, as Kelly asked the questions, could we maybe go in the order that we introduced ourselves in, which was Annika, Irene, Mackenzie, Miriam, Tara, and Tasia? And then Kelly can cycle through the questions. So Kelly, it's all yours.
Thank you. Well, thanks to everyone for your introductions, and thank you for taking the time to be a part of this panel. So we're going to start off this Q&A by asking what your regular work environment was like, and can you describe what you would expect from a typical day in your occupation?
Okay, I guess since I'm starting, I can answer that question. So I can speak for my time at the DC Health Department. My typical day working for the government was generally 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. And in that job, I would do both desk epidemiological work. And I would also be out in the field seeing patients for screening and medications, and also conducting investigations for disease outbreaks. So that was a little bit about my work when I was working for the local government. And in terms of being a student, I don't think I need to explain it to many of our student audience members. It's generally study, 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 attend class, take tests. And now that I'm in my third year of medical school, I have a clinical schedule, and that schedule oftentimes looks like 7 a.m. to 7 p.m., but it varies a lot. So.
Do you want me to just go ahead? This is Irene.
Sure, thank you.
Okay, so I can speak most about my last 19 years at the National Institutes for Allergy and Infectious Diseases. And most of you probably know who Dr. Fauci is, who was my boss. And a typical day would be pretty crazy because my responsibility for my division was all the policy, legislative, communications activities, as well as the budget operations for what was a $1.5 billion organization. And when I left, I was managing a group of 20 people who were doing all this. So I would often go into the office, you know, with what I thought I would be doing that day. And many times that's not what I would end up doing that day. Dr. Fauci is a fairly demanding individual, and we were basically servicing him and the things he needed. And for those 19 years, I mean, think about the infectious disease outbreaks that happened. I didn't work through COVID, but I worked through Ebola and lots of types of influenza, and, you know, helping to get money out the door rapidly when biodefense hit in 2003, 2004. So it was a really crazy kind of day, and I actually loved what I did for the 19 years that I did it. I had a great career.
Thank you, Irene, and thank you, Annika. Before I think Tara was next.
Yeah, sure. So there's a reason that I really love asset management, because it is chaos. My day consists of, you know, every meeting is something completely different, and exercise is a different part of my brain. I work through technical issues and warranty issues concerning our equipment. I work through issues with you know, our customers and our end users. I work through interconnection issues with the grid. And then, you know, on the flip side, I am reporting out our financial numbers. I'm managing our P&L statements, and I am defending the performance of our assets to the board and our investors. So it sort of exercises all parts of the brain. It's kind of along the lines of what Teha said, that we I have to be a little bit of a jack of all trades, and my job is some parts legal, some parts technical, some parts financial, and I think I wouldn't have it any other way.
Thank you. Miriam, are you next? Thank you.
Yeah, sure, I can go next. So for me, I'm a graduate student right now, and I am just finishing up. Sorry, my cat is in my kitchen jumping on things. I am finishing up my classes up in my second year. So I still have classes, which again, don't need to tell you how classes go. But in terms of lab, I kind of basically am in lab when I'm not in class. So I try to make myself a schedule. So it's basically very flexible, especially with my PI, it's very flexible, but I try to go kind of 9 to 6 every day. And it kind of depends on my experiments. So if I have more behavioral experiments, it would depend on the timing. But generally it's about 9 to 6 every day. And I do a lot of like electrophysiology experiments, imaging of different brain regions, and it's just kind of go every day. And with COVID restrictions, so I joined the lab during COVID, so it's kind of very strange for me, but with the restrictions now being kind of lifted a bit, because for all lucky enough here to be able to get the vaccine. So we were able to do that, and we're able to kind of go in and be in lab. So I'm able to be there more frequently now. And sometimes I have to go in weekends as well, but I try to set my boundaries.
Thank you. Mackenzie, could you please go next?
Great. So our work environment after college, I jumped into a political career immediately after school, which if you're working in political career, regardless of if it's focused on environmental science or not, most of the time your day starts with focusing on what happened the day before in the news. We ended up following a lot of how everything was focused in 2008 to 2012 on renewable energy policy and how it was shifting, the Obama administration and how things were being decided for our country, and a lot of environmental career shifts that were being developed, which ultimately impacted how many people who are graduating in my years and a few years after that were making decisions on where they were going to school for graduate school or where they were navigating their time and where they were going to focus their energy. So my full day ended up being focusing on getting to work and ending up reading a lot about the news and then focusing on where upcoming policy shifts were going and how we could direct a youth movement. After my time on the Hill, when I started to focus more on graduate school, that was really just being in courses, trying to navigate like where everything was moving with environmental policy. I worked a lot in renewable energy policy and a few jobs on the side from graduate school with SunPower, one of the country's leading solar panel and solar technology emphasis. On the West Coast, they own the majority of patents, for example, at the time when I worked with them and I was developing a lot of their movement in STEM education. And on the West Coast, that was a big deal at the time. Now I work for myself. Our emphasis on what we do here is usually pretty much seasonal, where the summer months, we're very busy. We have a lot of people coming through here, and every Friday and Saturday night, we host campfires for people as far as conversations about conservation and where these conversations need to go for the future of our next generations. We have parents that are young and trying to figure out how they can do the best job they can as leaders for their children. Teaching children about things like fire safety is actually a very important concept that we coach students on now. We have a lot of students from West Coast colleges, from the University of California, students from University of Humboldt, Berkeley, Santa Cruz, Santa Barbara, UCLA, come up and work with us on either its field studies, it's getting internship credit on how they can learn more about working in the field. We do a lot of emphasis on how we can maintain this space without doing too much development. There's a lot of people who come through here every year who end up learning a lot from this space by doing environmental work here, or they focus on applying a career studies or a credit that they can get through what their school is accrediting on how they can apply it to a large open space. It's a 600-acre campground. And so there's a lot of opportunities here in, say, watershed management, forestry management, and fire studies, of course, is becoming a more and more important topic to study on the West Coast. And so my day pretty much is navigated by what people need and are able to get from this space. We are trying to make sure that we're able to be flexible as a container in the coming years so that as needs change for students in the future, that we're able to adapt as it sees fit and stay flexible so that we're able to maintain and stay flexible to what people are going to need in the coming years as a environmental institute. Actually, is like a good goal to look forward to. So if you're a student looking for a place to study on the West Coast in the future, we're trying to stay flexible to how we might be able to suit your needs. That's my day.
All right, and finally, Teja, could you speak to this, please?
Yeah, sure. My day in a nutshell, I would say, is a lot of meetings, but they're meetings tied to the different phases of a technology. So, for example, one of my first conversations could be with the principal investigator who approaches me with, Teja, I have this great target. I think it will change the landscape of fibrosis and how fibrotic diseases are going to be treated. I'm like, great, show me the data. And the data he shows me are typically, in vitro data, cell culture data. It looks really cool. There's a hint of a mechanism of action, but there isn't any in vivo information, right? So then I talked to him about, have you considered working in this mouse models of fibrosis? Have you looked at patients who have fibrotic diseases and seen whether this gene has changed, right? So I'm providing that input from sort of that scientific background. So that's sort of the earliest stage of the technology. The next phase is maybe then thinking about the patentability of the technology. So he comes to me and he goes, hey, I have a ton of molecules now that I think can modulate how fibrosis is being observed in these mouse models. And in fact, I think there's a hint of this data in like other clinical trial studies where fibrosis was like a secondary endpoint. Take a look at these. So then I'm talking with the IP Council, Intellectual Property Council, to assess whether this is patentable or not. And if it is patentable, then this is sort of like the later stage of like the technology that I tend to be working in. That's where like my true job description falls. It's the licensing part of it. So now we have this very interesting tech. There's a few different targets now. There's a platform-based approach to treating fibrosis. I approach the venture capital arm of our hospital and go, hey, do you think there's enough for a startup here? Is this something you think we can invest in? Is this something we can do? And then the venture capitalists are like, let's think a little bit about the business model here. So this is where the consulting experience plays in, where I'm building a financial model, thinking about the size of the market, what else is out there, how is this different from what else is out there, and making that case to the venture capitalists along with the inventors, obviously. And then we go through new company formation. And I'm negotiating the deal with the new company. Basically, we will out-license this technology to you because this is intellectual property that originated from inventors in the hospital. We need some consideration back to the inventors for basically the thoughts and all the effort they put into developing this. So then I'm negotiating the deal, what are the royalties, what will be the milestone payments, when do I expect you to be hitting phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, how many indications do I expect you to be developing this product in? And that is very much a matter of negotiation and going back and forth. Once the deal is done, the company starts advancing the technology, and then we continue to manage those relationships, right? So we are evaluating if they are following through on those diligence requirements. Are you hitting phase 1 when you said you did? Did you not? Because there was COVID pertinent like supply chain issues, all very fair. And then we continue to negotiate those licenses. At the end of the day, our goal is to try and get ideas from bench to market, and what we do supports sort of the spectrum of those activities.
All right, well, thank you all. Your backgrounds all sound so unique and your careers all sound so interesting. So for the next questions, anyone can speak to them and they can be in no particular order, but the next question is, how can someone land a position like the ones you all have pursued? And in your opinion, what preparation is necessary for opportunities in your industry?
I'm happy to go first on that. Like I said, my career has been a lot of changing, from going from working in regulations to managing assets on the financial side. And I think what I have really learned is it takes a lot of humility and intellectual honesty and the ability to really roll up your sleeves and do any level of work that's necessary to get a job done and just absorb everything you can. We all start out in entry-level jobs. We all have bills to pay. I remember graduating and not knowing where my life was going to go. And I, could have been happy, I think, in a lot of different disciplines and careers, but I happened to be around energy news and energy trade press every day, and I started reading what I was photocopying for other people, and I just got super interested in it and wanted it to be, my career passion. So I think hard work and willingness to find unlikely mentors, and really leaning into opportunities that scare you. I think managing human facilities was nothing that I thought I could do. And somebody offered me that job. And I remember talking to my dad at the time saying, I don't think I can do this. And he said, yeah, well, you're young enough to fail. Like you'll be fine if you fail. And I didn't, and I still love what I'm doing. So I really think no matter what discipline you want to go into, being happy to do the hard work and being a good collaborator and a good communicator are all really important skills. And then being able to listen when opportunities come your way that you didn't envision for yourself or your life plan.
Thank you. That's some
Could
good advice.
this is Irene, could I follow that?
Of course. Yep.
Because I just want to echo almost exactly what she said. And it's interesting that she's so young and has already figured out what it took me many more years to figure out, which is first, your career trajectory is not a straight path. And it is usually not what you envision when you start out, because I certainly could never have predicted where I was going to end up in a career that I loved, that I didn't even know existed at the time I was an undergraduate. And so I always say you should be open to those opportunities, like she just said, open to those opportunities when they come along, because, and another lesson is don't be afraid to network, because, and don't burn any bridges, because those opportunities that came along for me, which took me in two different directions, were from people I knew, and were from people I knew from many years before. I had been postdocs with a woman. We had gone our separate ways for 15 years. And she called me up one day and said, you know, I've just taken over this new division. I want you to come and work with me. And I thought, oh my God, I don't know anything about microbiology. I'm a trained chemist. I didn't even know what a virus was at that point. And she said, oh, you're smart. You'll be able to do this, no problem. And she was right. And so, you know, that's kind of one lesson. Don't burn any bridges. Networking is important. Be open to opportunities when they come to you. And I would also echo what she just said, which is learn how to communicate orally and in writing. Those things will hold you in good stead for whatever career you go into. When I was hiring people at NIAID, I hired a lot of masters in public health, but I needed them to be able to write. And I needed them to be able to write for different audiences. You know, write for the Congress, write for scientists, write for the public, and write for the media. And those are 4 different audiences. So learning how to write and communicate and learning how to speak are just very, very important for whatever career. Thank you.
Thank you. Some helpful advice. Does anyone else want to speak to this question?
Sure, I have 3 main points that I think are sort of tangential to what Irene and Sarah have already mentioned. In addition to networking, I think it's important to build relationships even before you may know you need them. To Irene's point, this was a postdoc that she knew and they went their separate ways, but that person ended up being very instrumental to her path. In the same way, I can think of many anecdotal stories in the history of my very short career already, where a lot of folks and friends who you know were advocating for me behind the scenes, and it's important to build relationships that way. In addition to being open to opportunities, I think it's important to be able to ask for opportunities. Don't be shy about reaching out to other people and asking them more about their career paths, how they got there. Most folks are generally happy to provide input, and if they're not, you know, what do you have to lose? Someone just said no to your request, you know? And lastly, I think it's important to be able to tell a story. This is a skill that I continue to work on day in and day out. It's important to be able to narrate, be concise, be clear. And that's all I have to say for that.
Thank you. Well, Sorry, I lost my spot. But thank you all so much for your helpful advice, and there are definitely some great takeaways from that. My next question is, what is the single most significant change you have seen in your field since you were a student?
I mean, I can start by briefly talking about that, mostly because my answer will most likely be brief because I'm still a student. But something that has just really struck me, especially during coronavirus, is the use of telemedicine. So I remember when I was at the Department of Health before coronavirus, we made the transition to electronic medical records. The DC Department of Health was one of the last to do so. And it was a big change for a lot of the people working there. And then when I was doing tuberculosis work with directly observed therapy, we would drive to see patients in person and give them their TB medications. And also while I was at the health department, they made the transition to virtual directly observed therapy. And so I saw all these virtual changes being made in the field of medicine when I was at the health department. And then being in medical school, coronavirus started, and it was like that transition became expedited. And even now as a medical student, myself and a lot of colleagues spend a lot of time on telehealth, televisits, learning how to do healthcare and medicine virtually. And so I think that has been one of the biggest changes that I have seen, and is going to continue to be very prevalent moving forward.
Thank you.
I'll hop on here next. Having graduated in 2009, and here we are 11, 12 years later, my focus and background was on environmental studies and in renewable energy policy. The Obama years happened between me being in the middle of school and now after the Trump era administration. We studied climate change. We had the smallest and first group of students that took on environmental studies at American, and some of the first students in environmental studies that were actually taking it seriously for renewable energy policy across the country. The time that has changed since I was in school has focused more jobs on renewable energy policy across the country, in local government offices, in more infrastructure for local policy, for national offices, and for international opportunities. So, I think that I took a chance on getting into a school, a field of the school that was smaller, but also a study of field that might have just been considered more or less just an annex of biology at the time. But renewable energy policy, and then focusing on the argument behind the fact that it was the future, has shown that we really were in the right track, and that now more students than ever are following this, because it is truly going to be what we should have been studying all along if we are trying to truly make a sustainable future for our economy. So our economy on the local, our economy on the statewide, our economy on the countrywide, and our economy on an international conglomerate option, all capitalist societies that are basically focusing on how we're supposed to work together out of not just the pandemic, but issues that were occurring that led to the pandemic. You're on the right track if you're studying a lot more to do with how the environment influences all aspects of business, all aspects of health, all aspects of humanity. So, I mean, there was definitely a lot that has happened in the last 11, 12 years since I started getting into this field, but I would say that it's climate science. It's definitely something that has been the most important thing that I could have ever studied. And I'm so grateful that I had an opportunity to do this with American.
Thank you.
Sorry, I kind of want to say what changed for me personally. So I am still a student, never stopped being a student yet, but it's very different for me from like undergraduate versus graduate school, that like type of student you need to be, at least in my program, because in undergrad you have this very kind of, it's less high school, but you don't have that specific schedule, but you still have a specific schedule that allows you to kind of focus on things a lot, and like, this is your time to be in class, this is your time to do whatever. But in grad school is a lot more flexible, especially after you stop having classes. And for me personally, that was a big unexpected change for some reason, and it requires you to have like a lot more motivation and drive to be able to tell yourself, okay, this is my time frame, I need to do this for myself. And I need to set this time aside to not play with my cat or watch TikToks or whatever, but do my actual work that I need to do and publish my paper. So that's just kind of a personal change that happened for me that I have to think about a lot more now.
Thank you. Does anyone else want to speak to this question?
I can briefly comment. I think the field of biology and medicine is no longer the traditional kind of one pathway and one mechanism oriented like it used to be. A lot of the answers to these big questions in medicine are coming from a multitude of different fields. So you have data scientists, you have people who can model things in silico that are responding to these questions. The onset of big data is really something that's been changing the landscape of human genomics and how that's being translated to healthcare and therapeutics. So I think those are the two main sort of big changes that I've noticed in my sort of past 6 years.
Thank you all for your answers to this question. My next question is, what trends do you see for the future of the field that you're in? And could a current BA student, for example, land this type of job for today?
Did you say what trends do you see? I missed the second word.
Yes,
What trends do you see?
Yep.
Yeah, in my field, it is growing and changing, and the electric grid is something that has to, there's not large scale storage yet, so it's something that has to be balanced in real time every day, or every minute of every day, as you saw with the terrible power outages that just happened in Oklahoma and Texas. And so it could be a lifelong career for anybody, and figuring out how to build sustainable infrastructure with that, is also just a lifetime career. It's something that anybody could get into. I think for BAs that are graduating, that are just sort of willing to do entry-level jobs and learn and soak up everything they can, like I said before, there's certainly a lot to be done. And so I think there are a lot of ways, be it if you guys are in Washington as you're graduating from American, there's a lot of trade associations and political groups that are looking to educate lawmakers. There's a lot, as you heard from McKinsey, to do to work with lawmakers. I think that it is just a really rich field that's going to be expanding and changing, and it's something that is always trending towards some new innovation. So I think renewable energy and sustainability is a great field to go into.
Thank you for that. Does anyone else want to speak to this question? If not, we can move along to the Q&A.
I want to speak briefly, just since I know this is a Women in Science panel, and when you asked this question, what trends do you see for the future? I just want to do a shout out to say that there have been more women in medical school than ever before, and there are more women than men now in terms of recent numbers, and medicine has been a field that has been dominated by men since its invention. So I just want to say that for the future, I see more women becoming doctors, and I think that's a great thing for the future. And in terms of, is it possible for anyone to apply to medical school? I would say yes for that too. So that's the first thing that came to my mind.
Yeah, I'd like to echo that as well, because in graduate school, our program has probably 95%. We have only 3 men and like 20 something people. So it is mostly women, and it's all the applicants for the new upcoming year are also mostly women. So it is definitely becoming more kind of dominant. And again, anyone can apply and get in if you have the attitude of if you want to learn and are passionate about what you want to learn, you'll be okay.
Well, thank you all for the helpful advice, and thank you all for a great Q&A session. Now I think we're going to move on to the audience Q&A. And Dr. Larkin, did you want to have the first question?
Yes, thank you all. This is just absolutely fantastic. And we are starting to get some questions in the Q&A. And so we'll look through these questions and let you answer them. And then if we have time, we'll go back and do some from the list. But I really want to focus on the audience questions. So Gargi asks, to all the AU alumni, what advice do you have on being a minority in STEM, and how do you remain motivated? So I'll let you.
I can take a stab at this one. To be honest, I think that STEM opportunities for women in general have been more or less stronger than any other opportunities in any other field in the last few years. And so as a, when you talk about being a minority, others can speak to this more, but I think as a woman minority, that has been something that STEM has been, as an industry, embracing more, as STEM has become more of a thing. The emphasis is on women in STEM. So remaining motivated is easy because there's more grants for women in STEM. There's more jobs that have become more for employing women in STEM opportunities. STEM careers that continue to motivate women to be in leadership positions in STEM industry roles. Most of the time when you find women in these leadership roles, you would think that they would be, looking to hire more women in leadership roles underneath, as part of the management positions up there. Unfortunately, there's oftentimes an argument there about the fact that women are fighting for a lot more management positions, and that's a whole other panel discussion that we can have about women in leadership roles as science programs continue to grow in our country. But I do think that women in STEM are, as a minority, becoming less and less of an issue of it being a minority as women, and more like making sure there's racial minorities in the United States. At least I don't know about how STEM opportunities internationally are being tackled as far as diversity issues among race, but I do think that STEM is the one area of developing industries that actually has a shot for embracing as many elements of minority diversity as possible.
I can go next. So in my PhD program, there were 9 of us accepted for the program in immunology. I was the only woman of color, only person of color in that entire group. And almost everyone else in that group was Caucasian and came from Ivy League undergrads. So I felt very out of place a lot of times. And I think what helped me remain motivated was finding a community of people who helped me battle my imposter syndrome. I felt like I wasn't good enough a lot of times. And a lot of these are like female sort of scientists and mentors who are not shy about just letting me know, that's not a dumb question. Ask all the questions you want, because you can't go wrong, especially when you're like young in your career. And I think that's one of the quickest things I think I would recommend anyone would do if they're like a minority and they're in STEM. One, obviously identify the opportunities that Mackenzie was talking about, but also find your support system real quick before you start feeling like you're not good enough, because you definitely are. I mean, the fact that you're already at AU should say something, So just keep leaning in on that.
So just want to add, I think we have 2 great examples right in front of us about how women and minority women are making incredible advances. The Moderna vaccine for COVID was developed by an African-American woman at NIH, and the Mars lander, the chief scientist, is an Indian woman. And so I think the opportunities are definitely out there. And, you know, these people are not, they're not out there tooting their own horns. We don't find out about it until sort of by accident. We find out that these women who have spent many, many years plying their trade, getting their PhDs and doing science are making incredible contributions. And I think that is really, really fabulous right now.
Thank you so much for that. Does anybody else want to respond to that question before we go on to the next question? Okay, I'm going to turn it over to Kelly.
All right, so we have a couple questions from Anna. The first one is to Tara. Could you speak more on how you entered the energy infrastructure field? And any job hunting tips from anyone are very welcome.
Sure, thanks for the question, Anna. I think really the key is to become a subject matter expert in something that you're really interested in. I had to find something I was interested in first, but we all start out as non-subject matter experts in what we're doing, and what I looked for was any kind of research job, any kind of assistant job, any kind of coordinator job that I could find, again, that would pay the bills and interest me a little bit. And then you start making connections and soaking up what you can about the energy or the field in general. And so I would say just start looking for something that is in the energy infrastructure world. And job hunting, you know, there are tons of industry groups. I'm on the board of the San Francisco chapter of Women in Renewable. We Rise, I always forget what the acronym stands for. Women in Renewable Infrastructure, Sustainability, and Energy. So those are really great places to make connections and to look at their job boards in order to see what's out there and what you might be able to get into.
The second half of that question was about job hunting tips. I'm wondering if some of you might want to speak to that also. So I'll open it up if any of you want to comment on that.
Sure. I leaned so heavily on the career centers of both AU and Harvard back when I was job hunting. And I went to every gosh dang panel I could find just to learn more about the different career options out there. And honestly, like lean in on the career center, lean in on your alumni network. I'm always happy to talk to anyone from AU. Please reach out. I think just not being shy about reaching out to people and having those conversations, even if you may feel super awkward, they've all been there, you know.
I can also speak to that as someone who was job hunting in 2015 when I was about to graduate with my degree in public health. And definitely I leaned on the services of the Career Center, and they let me know how important it was to cast a wide net. And so I applied to a lot of jobs, got a lot of rejections, but also being open to opportunities. We've talked a lot about that in the past, and doing what interests you. And I'll also say that what you can do as an undergrad student, what I found very helpful is that exploring a wide range of opportunities and careers can be very important, even if you're not applying for a job. If you reach out to someone with a certain career, saying you're interested in learning more about what they do, maybe you could shadow them for a day, or perhaps have coffee with them. If you make a lot of these different connections, not only can you find more what you're interested in, but those connections can lead to opportunities in the future as well. And even people like your AU professors can be great resources because they know a lot of people, including prior alumni. I know that I still keep in touch with many of my professors from AU, including Dr. Larkin. And I've been connected with a lot of AU students in the past who are interested in similar careers to me. So even utilizing those opportunities while you're a student at AU.
Thank you so much. Let me move on to another question here. Mia is asking, hi everyone. Thank you for such a great panel. I'm having trouble finding summer opportunities for research as an undergrad. Most are very competitive, and was wondering if anyone has any advice on where to look for these opportunities and if there are any experiences you've had that have helped you reach your career goals. So let me open that up if anyone wants to take a stab at that.
I can try. So well, two things. So one is a lot of schools, other schools outside of AU do offer summer undergraduate programs, especially if they're graduate schools only. So for example, Penn State College of Medicine has a summer undergraduate program, research program, I think, SERP, yeah. So they take on undergraduates. So the way it is here, we don't have any undergraduates, it's only graduate students. So you can apply, contact the professors directly and ask to meet with them, talk to them about their research and show your interest. The other thing, what I did was I contacted professors at AU because I was interested in a few of their research. So I worked with Dr. Laubach, I worked with Dr. Riley, I worked with Dr. Studley. So I worked in 3 different labs basically. And 2 of them were over the summer and later on. But it was nice to kind of get to know them. And it also allowed me to get good recommendation letters for graduate school for later on, and I still keep my connections with them and talk to them all the time and reach out to them if I have any questions in my current research. So that's also a very easy, kind of easier, I would say, way to find opportunities since they are already there and are happy to take on students.
I think I just kind of vocalized during my biology classes to the professors. I think I talked to Dr. Arneson about wanting to do some research, and I didn't even realize that she was advocating for me behind the scenes, and I got some sort of like summer undergraduate research award that allowed me to do work at AU. And then I also reached out to Dr. Jessica Skinner, who was doing research at the National Cancer Institute around whether it was possible for me to do some work there. That ended up being my senior honors capstone research project. I talked to Dr. David Collini around some genetics supply research project. I forget the details now. But the point is, I think you can sense the theme here. It's generally asking your professors and the people you know around the things you're interested in, and you never know, they may just give you a shot, and then it's up to you to just put in the work and try and learn everything that you can. It's okay to be dumb as long as you're trying to learn. I think that's what I took out from AU, and I kind of, still maintain that to this day.
Thank you for your responses. And we have another question from Anna, and she says, to Mackenzie, can you elaborate on some of the student opportunities you have and the types of research that you've done recently? I think you might be muted.
I found it. It's funny because it actually indicated that with Zoom's a great example of a piece of technology that has become very much a part of our day-to-day. We have student opportunities that we're trying to navigate all the time, where especially now that a lot of students are not able to go back to their campuses, we tried to stay open this year to having students come live with us during the summer months when our camping season has been really big. Biology students have a great opportunity with us to notice the changing of our seasons, and then also doing research for data and metrics that are being applied for how California's watershed systems are being affected by climate change has been something where, because we have a more isolated environment here, there's data that can be collected by students here on site. Policy-wise, how watershed management and politics have been impacted through a lot of CEQA studies and California's Environmental Quality Act, and how this is impacting smaller watersheds is something where you can actually notice the changes here on site. Students have come to us and reach out to us. Usually we don't have a specific cookie cutter approach to how students will approach us for opportunities on site. Usually it depends on how your school is navigating how they'd like to give you credit for something. Usually is how students will reach out to us. We worked with the public school systems as far as local high schools and charter programs. We've brought out student groups, and we're trying to work with some ways that parents can be better educators through iNaturalist and apps on their phone. Parents have become more forced to be teachers than ever before in this case. And so opportunities where parents can become teachers here by utilizing, resources that we have on site for, say, taking a 3-hour hike with your child and being able to learn more about all of the biodiversity here on site. These are the kinds of things we're working on so that we are able to navigate the growing needs for teachers and the growing changes for what is to be a teacher, what it is to be a student. You can be a student in any form now. You don't necessarily have to be at an accredited high school, college, or university. You can always be a learner. And so if we provide a space where people can consistently be able to learn more and more, then that is something that we're able to provide, even though we're not necessarily an accredited school ourselves. We've had research opportunity. I guess that kind of covers what ways that schools and students have been able to come to us. Opportunities for research here is really more just seeing how navigating needs for metrics and data has changed, especially since we're only a few hours out of the San Francisco Bay Area. Metrics and data collection is becoming a bigger and bigger issue throughout the coming and booming eras of the growth of technology. And so being able to provide data, for example, we have many visitors every year. If we're able to provide metrics with the number of visitors we have, then that also is a way to help provide research for different groups that are looking to see how do, for example, in a post-COVID economy, how does a gathering safely take place? How are we able to look at studies of who comes to our campground, and it's a safe space, it's outdoors, people are able to gather in small groups. But when it comes to making sure that we've got, how far are people traveling in order to gather now, if it means that they're safely able to gather in California to these types of locations where they're outside? What are the pieces of information that are being collected and gathered from different companies that are looking to move forward safely in, this data age, data information and data mining age, and how can we be available for that? Trying to maintain flexibility is really important. And we're ready to pretty much stay flexible through this 2021 year and a 2022 year, and hopefully through how America and California are able to move on to the next growths of a post-COVID era by being here to make sure that people are still maintaining that they're getting together and being people. So I hope that answers somewhat of a question.
Thank you so much, Mackenzie. We have a question here from Shams, a comment and a question. First of all, thank you to the outstanding panelists. What an impressive panel of women in STEM. Also, thank you to the organizers of the WIS and alumni panel. So happy and proud to see this event continue. And Shams was a former president of WIS back in the day. So her question is, to all the AU alumni, looking back at your time at AU, what have been some of the AU experiences that you feel have helped you the most in your career so far?
I go first on that one. One of the number one things that has been the influence in my life that has put me onto my career is that I was involved very much with the EcoSense Environmental Sustainability Group. I'm not sure if they're still involved at AU and through the College of Arts and Sciences, but this is a shirt that I designed in 2006 when we were on campus. And we also made the Mugshots campaign. We sold recyclable mugs through the Davenport Coffee Lounge. We got students to be able to bring their reusable coffee mugs to the lounge so you could get coffee for $1. We worked hard with trying to make sure that there was a garden on campus that was being started, and that we were able to start working with making sure that the job source creation was a big, huge part of making sure that jobs on campus were very sustainably handled. EcoSense made a huge impact in 2006 with a referendum on campus that is now pushing towards more than 50%. I think that we were actually pushing towards 100% of our energy on campus was renewable before 2020. We reached those goals within half the amount of time. And we also set up offices of renewable energy so that the purchasing power for the campus, we created an a revolving fund so that any funds that were saved by the school on energy, by the investments that we were able to make and direct as students, actually got redirected into continuing to invest more in how the school would save money. Not only was this an amazing opportunity for a small group of students who are dedicated to the cause, it actually caught fire. And we actually ended up directing this opportunity to a ton of other schools along the Eastern Seaboard and beyond, which got a lot of students involved in what then became this huge movement in getting more students involved in sustainability beyond college. So EcoSense and being involved in the sustainability clubs in colleges made a huge impact on my life. I highly recommend getting involved and staying involved, following your passions. And then if you're ignited about something, it's okay that you're a dork about it. I think that I think one of you mentioned this before too. It's if you're really into something and it ignites your passion, never let that slow you down. Follow what you're doing, stick to the things that light you up, and don't let anybody stop you from doing it. So it made a huge difference for me. Teamwork made the green work. I still have my t-shirt. And if anybody else is listening in on this, who was involved in this, they would understand as well that it was a huge deal at the time. So thanks.
I would say that the couple of things that really helped me throughout my career are one that Irene brought up earlier. I was a history major, and that just meant writing a bunch of papers. And sure, I learned a lot about like 19th century French architecture, but what it really helped me with was being a really good writer and a good communicator. And then the physics part of my degree made it so that I understood technical things, and to be able to write about technical things is actually a pretty rare skill. You find technical people, you find good writers, but you don't find them in both. So I would say really take those papers that you have to write for your arts and humanities classes seriously, because they can develop a skill that is really invaluable. And then I think the other thing that really helped me in my career is I worked for Dr. Larkin, supervising some 100 level, 200 level physics labs. And I was a really shy, awkward college student. And I was not the type of person that had the authority or the presence to command a room or tell people what to do. And you got to learn those things as you get further in your career. And I'm sure I was terrible at it then, but I think I'm a little better at it now, and it started there.
I just want to say that I completely agree with what you said, Tara, about positions that teach you good communication skills. I would say positions that might seem unlikely for being successful in science were all the leadership positions I had, even on the student honors board, even my position as a resident assistant, and even giving tours on campus, because that really teaches you important communication skills, and leadership skills are very important if you're in science and you want to advocate for your research or apply for a grant. I think it's so important to be able to lead that team and advocate for research that you want to happen. And along that line, also what Tara said about teaching positions, I would say that's also really important because science can often be very technical. And so you need to be able to teach and explain things to different audiences at different levels. And being able to teach makes you more of an expert yourself. So any teaching, assisting opportunities or tutoring opportunities that you find at AU, I would definitely recommend.
Thank you so much. Kelly, do you want to take it over?
Yeah, sure. I actually had one last question. So school and like following a career path can be difficult at times, especially during these unprecedented times. So do you have any advice on how to stay motivated and like focused on our STEM goals despite like setbacks, like for example, the pandemic, or even like rejections from labs or jobs and things like that, for example?
I personally made like a vision board type of thing and try to have my goals just there for me to look at them. I have a lot of fun neuroscience-y things like brain clocks and brain squeeze balls that I got from AU, which I still use. So they kind of help remind me why I'm doing the things I'm doing. It's little things, but they work. And I think keeping that social connection with people. I know it's supposed to be social distancing, but it's more physical than social. So the social connections are very important to have, like to study, for example, right now with my friends, we still kind of have Zoom study sessions. We make sure to set time aside to work on things together and figure things out together so that we remind each other of our goals as well. And it kind of helps you be accountable to someone else to what you're going to do. I think writing them down on a journal or whatever works for you, or even putting your big goal in like 1 or 2 words as a background on your laptop or on your phone could be very helpful as well to just keep reminding you of why you're doing the things you're doing.
I would say just stop worrying so much about the things you think you're worried about. The setbacks in my career that I have encountered were things I could never have seen coming. And, you know, people I thought were allies turned out to be super misogynistic, and it just shocks me. And I didn't know what to do, but I was busy worrying about something else, and I didn't see that coming. And when you get setbacks, remember that, you know, most of the people that are working with you probably have a little bit of imposter syndrome too. Like, you got to lean into how smart you are and how much you know and how much grit you have to figure out the things that you don't know. That's my advice.
I can speak about a personal experience. It says applying for graduate schools right after AU. And I got rejected from everywhere. Harvard was like maybe my last, or sorry, either got rejected or didn't hear back from almost every place except like Harvard and maybe like one more other university. Honest, I can't remember the name now. I mean, I don't know what to do. I was an international student. I couldn't stay in the country without, you know, figuring out like my immigration status. I already talked to the AU biology department and started thinking about the combined bachelor's master's program, started moving forward on that. Next thing I know, I got this call from Harvard when I was like in lab saying, you know what, we really liked you in the interview, you know, we would love you to join our program. And, you know, that changed my life. I think it set me up in a way that I never would have expected. But yeah, that was a very low point. And the fact that, you know, like, I think what kept me going was just sort of like, look, I got here, I still want to learn about science, and I'm going to keep trying to do that in any way I can, in any opportunity I could find. I leaned in on the people I knew, which was the AU bio department. They were kind enough to take me in. Of course, when I told them about Harvard, they were like, yeah, okay, fine. I suppose you can choose not to do your master's here anymore. But yeah, I mean, I think to Mackenzie's point of like following your passion and something that ignites you, knowing that I was going to keep working in science in some way, shape, or form kind of kept me going. Hang in there, it'll be okay. And to Tara's point, things you can control, things you cannot control, things you can't control, you really can't do anything about them, so stop worrying about it. Things you can control, can you do something about it? Do it, and then let it go. You know, like honestly, there's no other approach you can take.
Well, thank you so much for the helpful advice. I think that'll be the last question of our audience Q&A. I'd like to thank you all so much for your time and for all your thoughtful responses to the questions. I know there's so many things I've taken away from this, and I'm sure that everyone else has. So thank you all panelists, and thank you all of the audience members, attendees. It's been a great Q&A session, and thank you, everyone.
Thank you all so much.
Thanks a lot. It was a
Excellent
pleasure.
job.
I'm
Thank
really
you.
glad I got a chance
You.
to connect with all of you. Thank you.
Such an honor to spend this evening with you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn.